"I'm her husband," William declared, his voice a thunderclap slicing through the tense corridor of the Starlight Pavilion. The words stopped Ethan cold, his predatory smirk crumbling as Quinn's radiant presence shone brighter than ever. In a Miami night pulsing with opulence, Quinn, a reclusive black singer, faced her past and a dangerous plot threatening her triumphant debut. Would her voice, a beacon of resilience, prevail against prejudice and vengeance? We're diving into a tale of courage, love, and justice that'll keep you on edge. Where are you tuning in from? Drop your city in the comments and share your, "Guess will Quinn turn the tables?" Don't miss a second of this gripping story. Hit that subscribe button for our latest videos, like, and comment to join the journey. Stay tuned to see how Quinn's unyielding voice changes everything. The Miami skyline burned with the fire of a dying sun, its glass towers ablaze in hues of amber and rose, casting jagged reflections across the city's pulsing heart. The Starlight Pavilion stood at its center, a cathedral of modern opulence, its sleek marble columns and cascading crystal chandeliers whispering of wealth and exclusivity. Inside, the air thrummed with anticipation, a low hum of voices from a crowd draped in designer silks and tailored suits, their champagne flutes catching the light like tiny stars. Tonight was no ordinary night. It was the unveiling of Quinn, a reclusive black singer whose soulful tracks had climbed charts in secret, her identity cloaked behind a pseudonym that left the world hungry for more. At 32, Quinn was a vision of unyielding grace, her long black hair falling like a silken river down her back, her deep brown eyes holding a fire that could warm hearts or scorch through prejudice. Backstage, the world felt smaller, sharper, the air thick with the scent of polished wood, and the faint tang of stage lights warming up. Quinn stood in a quiet corner, her emerald gown clinging softly to her frame, its rich green hue a bold contrast to her radiant skin. The fabric shimmered as she moved, catching the dim glow of a nearby spotlight, but it was her presence that commanded the space, a quiet storm of resolve and artistry. Her fingers brushed the cool metal of her microphone, grounding her as she traced its smooth curve, a talisman for the moment she'd waited years to claim. This was her debut, her first step into the public eye after a decade of crafting music. In the shadows, her voice a weapon and a balm for souls the world overlooked. She closed her eyes, letting the distant hum of the crowd wash over her. Their murmurs were a tide, rising and falling, carrying the weight of expectation. Quinn's heart beat a steady rhythm, not of fear, but of purpose. She'd always known her voice was more than sound. It was a story, woven from the joys of her childhood in a cramped Miami apartment, the sting of rejection in college, and the quiet triumphs of nights spent writing songs by candlelight. Each note she'd sing tonight was a thread in that tapestry, a declaration of her right to be seen, heard, and unapologetically herself. Her thoughts drifted to her husband, William, waiting somewhere in the crowd, his warm brown eyes crinkling with pride. A billionaire real estate magnate, William had built the Starlight Pavilion, this glittering stage, as much for her as for the city. Their love was a sanctuary, a tether that kept her grounded through the chaos of her rise. And their daughter, Lila, 6 years old with her mother's bright eyes, was likely curled up at home with her nanny, dreaming of the day she'd hear her mother's voice soar. The thought of Lila's giggle brought a soft smile to Quinn's lips, her fingers tightening around the microphone. The backstage crew bustled around her, their headsets crackling with last-minute checks. A stagehand darted past, adjusting a light rig, while the sound engineer's voice barked through a speaker, testing levels. Quinn tuned them out, her focus narrowing to the music in her mind. She hummed a soft jazz tune, its melody weaving through, her thoughts like a lover's whisper steadying her pulse. The song she'd open with tonight, a haunting ballad of loss and redemption, was one she'd written after a sleepless night, its lyrics born from the ache of a world that too often judged her before she could speak. Tonight, that world would listen. She adjusted her earpiece, the faint static a reminder of the technology bridging her to the audience. Her long hair swayed as she turned, catching the eye of a young assistant who offered a nervous smile. "5 minutes, Ms. Quinn. he said, his voice trembling with awe. She nodded, her smile warm but fleeting, her mind already on the stage. The weight of this moment pressed against her, not as a burden, but as a spark, igniting the fire she'd carried since she was a girl singing in her church choir, her voice rising above the congregation like a beacon. The pavilion's backstage was a labyrinth of cables and curtains, but Quinn moved through it with the ease of someone who belonged. She'd rehearsed here for weeks, her footsteps echoing in the empty hall, her voice testing the acoustics until they felt like an extension of her soul. She knew every inch of this stage, every shadow where the lights didn't reach. Yet tonight, it felt different, alive, charged with the energy of 1,000 eyes waiting beyond the velvet curtain. Her thoughts were interrupted by a prickling sensation, a subtle shift in the air. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the dim corridor. A figure lingered near the crew's equipment, half hidden in the shadows. For a moment she thought it was a stagehand, but the posture was too rigid, the gaze too sharp. Her heart quickened, not from fear but from recognition. A ghost from her past she wasn't ready to face. She shook it off, turning back to her microphone, her fingers tracing its curve once more. Whoever it was, they'd have to wait. This was her night, her stage, her truth. The crowd's hum grew louder, a wave cresting just beyond the curtain. Quinn's manager, a wiry woman with a clipboard and a no-nonsense glare, appeared at her side. "You're ready," she said, more statement than question. Quinn nodded, her lips parting in a quiet exhale. "Always," she replied, her voice soft but ironclad. The manager's eyes softened, a rare crack in her armor. "Knock 'em dead, Q." As the stage lights flared to life, their glow seeping through the curtain's edges, Quinn stepped toward the stage entrance. Her emerald gown caught the light, shimmering like a jewel against her skin. She could feel the crowd's energy now, a living thing pressing against her, pulling her forward. Her long hair swayed with each step, a dark tide marking her path. She paused at the curtain, her hand brushing its velvet weight, her breath steady but electric. The announcer's voice boomed through the pavilion, smooth and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, prepare to be captivated by the voice that's taken the world by storm. Making her debut tonight, the one, the only, Quinn!" The crowd erupted, their applause a thunderous wave that crashed against the stage. Quinn's heart swelled, not with nerves, but with a fierce joy. This was her moment, the one she'd fought for, dreamed of, bled for. She stepped forward, the curtain parting like a sea, revealing the vast expanse of the Starlight Pavilion. The spotlight found her, bathing her in a golden glow, her emerald gown aflame against the darkness. The crowd's cheers surged, a tide of love and expectation. Quinn raised the microphone to her lips, her eyes scanning the sea of faces, her voice ready to soar. She was no longer the girl who sang in shadows. She was Quinn, unyielding, radiant, unstoppable. The stage was hers, and the world would hear her truth. The backstage of the Starlight Pavilion buzzed with controlled chaos, a symphony of clattering equipment and muffled voices. The air was thick with the scent of warm electronics and the faint perfume of the floral arrangements lining the corridor. Quinn stood in the dim light, her emerald gown catching stray glints from a nearby spotlight, her long black hair a silken cascade that framed her radiant face. Her fingers lingered on her earpiece, adjusting it with deliberate care, her deep brown eyes narrowing as she steadied her breath. The roar of the crowd beyond the curtain was a distant tide, but here, in this shadowed maze of cables and crates, the world felt sharper, more intimate. She was moments from stepping into the spotlight, her debut performance poised to unveil her to a world that knew her voice, but not her face. Yet, as she prepared to claim her moment, a venomous voice sliced through the hum like a blade. "Well, look who's playing dress-up," sneered Ethan, his tone dripping with condescension. Quinn's heart lurched, not from fear, but from the jolt of recognition. She turned, her hair swaying like a dark tide, and there he was, her college ex, standing just a few feet away, his tailored black suit a polished veneer over the cruelty in his hazel eyes. His arm was draped around a woman in a sequined red dress, her lips curled in a smirk that mirrored his. The woman's blonde hair was swept into a tight updo, her diamonds glinting under the corridor's dim lights. But it was Ethan's gaze that cut deepest, those same eyes that had once promised love only to leave her heart in shards a decade ago. "Didn't think you'd crawl out of obscurity to crash a place like this," Ethan continued, his voice low but sharp, each word a calculated jab. His companion giggled, her eyes raking over Quinn's gown as if it were a cheap costume borrowed. "For the night?" The sound was a needle piercing the fragile calm Quinn had built. Her jaw tightened, the memory of their college years flashing like a storm. Late-night arguments, his betrayal with another, the way he'd dismissed her dreams of music as cute hobbies. She'd buried that pain long ago, but here he was, dragging it back into the light. Quinn straightened, her shoulders squaring as she met his gaze. "I'm here to sing, Ethan," she said, her voice steady, a quiet blade honed by years of resilience. "Not to revisit old mistakes." The words landed with precision, and for a fleeting moment Ethan's smirk faltered, his eyes flickering with something, anger perhaps, or wounded pride. But he recovered quickly, his laugh sharp and hollow, echoing off the corridor's walls. "Sing?" he scoffed, leaning closer, his cologne a bitter intrusion. "This isn't some open mic at a dive bar, Quinn. You're out of your league." His companion's giggle grew louder, a grating chorus to his cruelty. She nudged Ethan, her voice a stage whisper meant to be heard. "Bet she's just here for the free champagne," she said, her eyes flicking to Quinn's scuffed heels, barely visible beneath the hem of her gown. The insult was a dart, aimed to wound, but Quinn refused to flinch. Her fingers tightened around her earpiece, the cool plastic grounding her, tethering her to the music waiting in her chest. She wasn't here to answer their assumptions, to prove herself to strangers or ghosts from her past. This night was hers, forged in years of sacrifice, of singing into the dark until the world finally listened. "Enjoy the show," Quinn said, her tone cool but laced with iron. She turned away, her hair sweeping across her shoulders, a dark veil shutting Ethan out. His laughter followed her, sharp and careless, but she let it fade, focusing on the faint hum of her jazz tune in her mind, the melody that had carried her through worse storms than this. She moved toward the stage entrance, her heels clicking, softly on the polished floor, each step a quiet act of defiance. The crew bustled around her, oblivious to the encounter, their headsets crackling with final checks. A stagehand darted past carrying a coil of cables, while the stage manager's voice barked through a speaker. 2 minutes, Quinn." She nodded, her eyes fixed on the velvet curtain ahead, its deep burgundy folds promising the stage beyond. But Ethan's presence lingered like a shadow, his words burrowing into the edges of her resolve. She remembered the nights he'd mocked her ambition, calling her voice pretty, but not enough. Back then, she'd believed him, her confidence, a fragile thing he'd chipped away with every careless word. Now, standing on the cusp of her debut, she saw him for what he was, a man diminished by his bitterness, clinging to a past where he held power over her. Quinn paused near a stack of equipment crates, her reflection faintly visible in a polished metal panel. The woman staring back was no longer the unsure college girl Ethan had known. Her eyes burned with purpose, her posture unyielding, her gown a testament to the strength she'd built. She adjusted her earpiece one last time, her fingers steady despite the pulse of anger Ethan's words had stirred. He didn't know her now, didn't know the nights she'd spent perfecting her craft, the songs she'd poured her soul into, the love she'd found with William, a man who saw her as unstoppable. The memory of William steadied her, his warm smile a beacon in her mind. He was out there somewhere, in the crowd, his presence a quiet anchor. She pictured their daughter Lila at home, her tiny hands clapping to the rhythm of Quinn's practice sessions. This performance wasn't just for her, it was for Lila, for every dreamer told they didn't belong. Ethan's scorn was a faint echo compared to that truth. The stage manager appeared, her clipboard clutched like a shield. "Ready, Q?" she asked, her eyes searching Quinn's face. Quinn's smile was small but fierce, a spark igniting in her chest. "Born ready," she said, her voice a low hum of conviction. The manager nodded, a flicker of admiration in her gaze, and gestured toward the curtain. The crowd's hum grew, louder, a living thing pressing against the velvet, pulling Quinn forward. As she took her final steps toward the stage entrance, Ethan's voice faded, his cruelty no match for the fire in her soul. The curtain loomed ahead, its folds a gateway to her destiny. Quinn's hand brushed its velvet edge, her heart a drumbeat of anticipation. She was no longer the girl he'd tried to diminish. She was Quinn, a voice ready to shatter the silence, a woman ready to claim her place. The stage awaited, and with it, the world. The velvet curtain parted with a whisper, revealing the Starlight Pavilion's vast expanse, a sea of glittering faces bathed in the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. The air pulsed with expectation, the crowd's murmurs fading into a hushed reverence as Quinn stepped into the spotlight. Her emerald gown caught the light like a jewel, shimmering against her radiant skin, her long black hair cascading in waves that seemed to defy gravity. At 32, she was no longer the shadowed singer behind a pseudonym. She was a force, her presence commanding the stage like a queen claiming her throne. The microphone rested lightly in her hand, its cool metal an extension of her will, ready to carry her voice to the world. The audience leaned forward, their breaths held captive, unaware of the storm she'd just weathered backstage. This was her moment, and she would make it unforgettable. The first notes of her opening song, a soulful jazz ballad, hung in the air, delicate yet piercing, like the first stars piercing a twilight sky. Quinn's lips parted, and her voice poured forth, a velvet tide that swept through the pavilion, wrapping every heart in its embrace. The melody was raw, woven from the ache of loss and the fire of redemption, each note a piece of her soul laid bare. Her deep brown eyes scanned the crowd, not seeking approval but offering truth, her gaze a quiet challenge to anyone who dared look away. The music swelled, her voice rising with it, a soaring crescendo that seemed to lift the very walls of the pavilion. In the front row, Ethan sat frozen, his tailored suit a hollow armor against the power of her performance. The smirk he'd worn backstage was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed awe as he recognized the voice that had once hummed softly. In their college dorm, beside him, his companion shifted uncomfortably, her sequined dress dull in the shadow of Quinn's radiance. Ethan's hazel eyes widened, his hands clenching in his lap, as if grappling with the realization that the woman he'd mocked was the same one now holding 1,000 souls in thrall. Quinn didn't see him. Her focus was on the music, on the faces in the crowd, on the stories she wove with every lyric. The ballad's lyrics spoke of a woman rising from betrayal, her heart scarred but unbroken, her voice a beacon in the dark. Quinn's delivery was effortless, each phrase infused with a raw honesty that made the audience feel seen, as if she sang for them alone. A woman in a sapphire gown dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief, her mascara smudging. An older man in a tuxedo leaned forward, his hands clasped, as if afraid to miss a single note. The pavilion's opulence, the marble columns, the cascading fountains outside, faded into insignificance, dwarfed by the force of Quinn's presence. Her long hair swayed as she moved, a dark tide that seemed to dance with the music, her gown catching the light with every subtle gesture. The crowd was no passive audience. They were a living part of her performance, their energy feeding hers. A young couple in the balcony held hands, their eyes locked on Quinn, their faces alight with wonder. A group of teenagers near the stage whispered excitedly, one pulling out a phone to capture the moment, only to lower it as Quinn's voice demanded their full attention. Her music was a bridge, connecting strangers, stirring memories, igniting hopes. She felt it, their love, their awe, their unspoken stories, and it fueled her, her voice growing bolder, richer, filling every corner of the pavilion. Halfway through the song, Quinn paused, letting a single note linger, suspended in the air like a held breath. The silence was electric, the crowd hanging on the edge of anticipation. She closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling, and then unleashed the next verse, her voice climbing to a powerful peak that sent shivers through the room. The sound was both tender and fierce, a paradox that held the audience captive. Man in the back row stood, unable to contain himself, his applause breaking the spell, and soon the entire pavilion erupted, their cheers a thunderous wave that crashed against the stage. Quinn's lips curved into a small, fierce smile, her eyes opening to meet the crowd's adoration. She didn't bask in it, she channeled it, letting their energy flow through her into the next song. This one was faster, a jazz-infused anthem of defiance, its rhythm pulsing like a heartbeat. Her voice danced over the notes, playful yet commanding, inviting the audience to rise with her. Some swayed in their seats, others tapped their feet, the pavilion alive with a shared rhythm. Quinn moved with the music, her gown shimmering, her hair a dark cascade that seemed to carry the light with it. She was no longer just a singer. She was a storyteller, a warrior, a beacon. In the crowd, William sat near the front, his charcoal suit blending into the sea of elegance, but his blue eyes shone with pride. He knew the weight of this moment, the years of struggle behind it, the nights Quinn had doubted herself, only to rise stronger. He leaned forward, his hands clasped, his heart swelling with every note. He saw her not just as his wife, but as the unstoppable force she'd always been, the woman who'd turned their love into a sanctuary. Their daughter Lila was at home, but William could almost see her bright eyes in Quinn's, her spirit echoing in every lyric. As the song neared its end, Quinn's voice softened, the final notes lingering like a farewell kiss. The crowd held its breath, unwilling to break the spell, and then erupted again, their applause a tidal wave of love. Quinn stood tall, her chest heaving, her eyes bright with a fire that no one, not Ethan, not the world, could extinguish. She lowered the microphone, her smile a quiet triumph, her heart pounding with the certainty that this was only the beginning. The stage was hers, and she had claimed it, not with arrogance, but with the unyielding truth of her voice. The spotlight held her, a golden embrace as she took a moment to breathe, to feel the weight of what she'd done. She'd stepped out of the shadows, her music no longer a secret but a force that reshaped the air. The crowd's cheers washed over her, a balm to the sting of Ethan's words, a reminder of why she'd fought for this night. She was Quinn, radiant, unstoppable, her voice a blade that cut through silence and doubt. The pavilion thrummed with her triumph, and as she prepared for her next song, she knew the world was listening. The Starlight Pavilion's applause still echoed in Quinn's ears as she stepped off the stage, her emerald gown trailing behind her like a comet's tail. The air backstage was cooler, thick with the scent of dust and electronics, a stark contrast to the glittering warmth of the spotlight. Her long black hair swayed, catching the dim glow of overhead lights, her heart still racing from the crowd's adoration. At 32, Quinn had just bared her soul to 1,000 strangers, her voice weaving a spell that left them spellbound. She felt invincible, her spirit alight with the triumph of her debut. But the corridor she entered was a shadowed labyrinth, its narrow walls and scattered equipment crates a world away from the pavilion's opulence. As her heels clicked softly on the polished floor, a prickle of unease crawled up her spine. Warning she couldn't yet name. She moved toward her dressing room, her microphone still clutched in one hand, its weight a reminder of the power she'd just wielded. The crew bustled around her, their headsets crackling, their movements a blur of efficiency. A stagehand offered a quick nod, his eyes wide with awe, but Quinn's focus was inward, savoring the afterglow of her performance. She hummed a soft jazz tune, the same melody that had steadied her before the show, its notes a shield against the world's sharp edges. The corridor's dim light cast long shadows, and for a moment she felt alone, wrapped in the quiet victory of her music. Then a voice, low, slick, and venomous, sliced through her reverie. "Quinn, that was Incredible, Ethan said, stepping out from the shadow of a crate. Her college ex loomed closer, his tailored black suit pristine, but his hazel eyes glinting with something predatory. His smile was a mask, too charming, too practiced, and it sent a chill through her. The woman in the sequined dress was gone, leaving Ethan alone, his presence filling the corridor like a storm cloud. "We should talk," he continued, his voice soft but laced with intent. "Like old times." He stepped closer, his hand grazing her arm, the touch uninvited and heavy with presumption. Quinn's heart quickened, not from fear, but from the raw indignation of his audacity. She pulled back, her eyes narrowing to slits. "There's nothing to say, Ethan," she said, her voice a blade, sharp and unyielding. "Move on." Her words were a wall, but Ethan's smile only widened, his grip tightening for a fleeting moment before she jerked her arm free. His touch lingered like a stain, a violation that stirred memories of his betrayal, a college love that had crumbled under his lies and infidelity. She'd rebuilt herself since then, forged in the fire of her own resilience, but his presence was a spark threatening to ignite old wounds. Ethan leaned closer, his cologne a bitter intrusion, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Come on, Q, you can't tell me you don't miss what we had." His words were a trap, baited with false nostalgia, but Quinn saw through them. His eyes betrayed his intent, not love, but possession, a need to reclaim what he'd lost when she walked away. Her jaw clenched, her fingers tightening around the microphone, its cool metal grounding her. She was no longer the girl he'd known, the one who'd faltered under his dismissals. She was Quinn, a singer whose voice had just shaken the Starlight Pavilion, a woman who refused to be diminished. "Step back, Ethan," she said, her tone low but electric, each syllable a warning. She turned toward her dressing room, her hair sweeping across her shoulders like a dark curtain, shutting him out. But Ethan moved faster, his hand reaching for her wrist, his fingers brushing her skin with a boldness that made her stomach churn. The corridor's shadows seemed to close in, the hum of the crew fading as her pulse roared in her ears. She was ready to shove him away, her body tensing when a deep voice cut through the tension like a thunderclap. "Step away from my wife." William emerged from the corridor's end, his charcoal suit a symbol of quiet authority, his blue eyes blazing, with an intensity that pinned Ethan in place. At 40, William was a billionaire real estate magnate, the architect of the Starlight Pavilion, and the man who'd built a life with Quinn, rooted in love and respect. His presence was a force, his tailored suit and steady gait exuding a power that needed no bluster. Ethan's hand froze midair, his smirk crumbling as he registered the man before him. The air crackled with unspoken challenge, the corridor a battlefield where egos clashed. "Who the hell are you?" Ethan snapped, his voice cracking with defiance, but his bravado was a thin veneer. His eyes darted between Quinn and William, searching for an escape from the trap he'd walked into. William's smile was polite but razor-sharp, a blade cloaked in civility. "I'm William, Quinn's husband," he said, his voice calm but resonant, carrying the weight of truth. "And this event? It's mine. You're out of line." The words landed like a gavel, final and unyielding. Ethan's face flushed, his hands clenching, but William's gaze held him, unwavering, a silent promise of consequences. Quinn exhaled, her shoulders easing as she stepped closer to William, her hand finding his, their fingers entwining like roots of an unshakable tree. Ethan's companion was nowhere to be seen, her absence leaving him exposed, his arrogance faltering under William's scrutiny. "You think you can just—" Ethan began, his voice rising, but William raised a hand, a subtle gesture that silenced him. The corridor seemed to shrink, the shadows tightening around Ethan's shrinking figure. "Escort him out," William said, his tone even but absolute, directed to two security guards who materialized from the shadows, their faces stern. The guards moved with practiced efficiency, seizing Ethan's arms, their grip firm but professional. Ethan struggled, his curses sharp and desperate. But the guards were unmoved, dragging him toward the exit as his shouts echoed down the corridor. Quinn watched, her heart steady, her eyes cold but triumphant. Ethan's attempt to reclaim her had crumbled, his pride a casualty of his own making. William turned to her, his blue eyes softening, his hand squeezing hers. "You okay?" he asked, his voice a balm, warm and grounding. Quinn nodded, her smile small but fierce, her spirit unbroken. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of their shared strength. The corridor's shadows retreated, the hum of the crew returning as the moment passed. Ethan was gone, but Quinn knew his kind, men who saw her light and sought to dim it. She clutched her microphone tighter, her resolve a flame that burned brighter than ever. As she moved toward her dressing room, William at her side, the pavilion's distant applause lingered, a reminder of the stage she'd claimed. The night was hers, and no ghost from her past could steal it. The Starlight Pavilion's backstage corridor felt colder now, its dim lights casting long, jagged shadows across the polished floor. Quinn stood beside William, her emerald gown still shimmering faintly, her long black hair a dark cascade that framed her resolute face. The echo of Ethan's curses lingered, his voice fading as security guards dragged him toward the exit, his tailored suit rumpled under their grip. The air was thick with the aftermath of confrontation, the scent of dust and electronics mingling, with the faint tang of tension. Quinn's hand remained entwined with William's, their fingers a quiet anchor, her heart steady but burning with the fire of her triumph. Ethan's attempt to rekindle old flames had been snuffed out, his arrogance shattered by William's unwavering presence. But Quinn sensed the night wasn't over. Ethan's pride was a festering wound, and men like him didn't retreat so easily. William's blue eyes softened as he looked at her, his charcoal suit a stark contrast to the corridor's utilitarian gloom. "You sure you're okay?" he asked again, his voice low, a thread of concern woven into its warmth. Quinn nodded, her lips curving into a fierce smile, her deep brown eyes glinting with defiance. "He's nothing," she said, her tone sharp but steady, dismissing Ethan's shadow with the certainty of a woman who'd faced worse and emerged stronger. William's hand squeezed hers, a silent vow, and for a moment the corridor felt like a sanctuary, their love a shield against the world's sharp edges. But the victory was fleeting. As they turned toward Quinn's dressing room, the distant hum of the pavilion's crowd a reminder of her triumph on stage, William's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening, his posture shifting to the alertness of a man who'd built an empire by anticipating threats. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice calm but edged with steel. Quinn's brow furrowed, her instincts prickling, but she trusted William's intuition as much as her own. He gestured to a nearby security guard, a broad-shouldered man with a radio clipped to his belt, and whispered something too low for Quinn to hear. The guard nodded, his eyes scanning the corridor, his hand resting on his radio. Quinn's dressing room was a small oasis of calm, its walls lined with soft lighting and a mirror framed in sleek wood. She set her microphone on the vanity, its surface cluttered with makeup brushes and a vase of white roses, a gift from William before the show. She caught her reflection, her radiant skin glowing under the lights, her gown a vibrant green that seemed to pulse with life. But the unease from Ethan's encounter clung to her, a shadow she couldn't shake. She sat, her fingers brushing the rose's petals, their softness grounding her as she exhaled, trying to reclaim the high of her performance. William stood by the door, his phone now in hand, his fingers typing swiftly. "I don't trust him," he said, his voice low, his eyes flicking to Quinn. "Ethan's not the type to walk away." She nodded, her heart quickening, not from fear, but from the recognition of truth. Ethan's eyes had held a darkness backstage, a hunger that wasn't about love but control. She'd seen it in college, when he'd mocked her dreams, and now, when he'd tried to claim her success as his own. William's foresight had always been his strength. He'd built the Starlight Pavilion, a monument to his vision, and he'd built their life with the same care, always a step ahead of danger. The guard knocked softly, his face grim as he leaned. "Iniwo, sir. We've got reports of someone lingering near the parking lot, not one of ours." William's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening around his phone. "Keep eyes on it," he said, his tone clipped but calm. "Shadow Quinn until we're at the car." The guard nodded, disappearing into the corridor, his boots a faint echo on the floor. Quinn stood, her gown rustling, her resolve hardening. "He's not worth this," she said, her voice a quiet fire. "Let's go home." William's smile was brief but warm, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "We will," he said, "but not until I know you're safe." They moved through the corridor, William's arm a steady presence at her side, the guard trailing at a discreet distance. The pavilion's opulence felt distant now, its chandeliers and marble corridors a world away from the tension coiling in Quinn's chest. She clutched her small purse, the weight of her performance's triumph tempered by the threat of Ethan's lingering malice. The exit loomed ahead, a glass door leading to the parking lot where the Miami night waited, its air heavy with the salt of the nearby ocean. As they stepped outside, the cool breeze brushed Quinn's skin, her hair swaying like a dark tide. The parking lot was a maze of luxury cars, their sleek surfaces glinting under sodium lights. William's black SUV waited nearby, its driver standing ready, but the shadows between the cars felt alive, watchful. Quinn's heels clicked on the asphalt, each step deliberate, her eyes scanning the darkness. William's hand rested lightly on her back, a gesture both protective and grounding, his gaze sweeping the lot with the precision of a hawk. Then, a movement, a flicker in the shadows near a row of parked cars. Quinn's heart lurched, her instincts screaming. But before she could react, William's guard sprang forward, his radio crackling as he called for backup. A figure in a dark hoodie emerged, his movements quick and purposeful, a glint of metal. In his hand, Quinn froze, her breath catching, but the guard was faster, tackling the figure to the ground with a thud that echoed in the quiet lot. The man struggled, his curses muffled, but a second guard appeared, pinning him down, a pair of handcuffs clicking into place. William stepped forward, his presence commanding, his voice low but thunderous. "Who sent you?" he demanded, his blue eyes boring into the man's face. The attacker, his hoodie slipping to reveal a scarred cheek, spat out a curse but faltered under William's gaze. "Talk," William said, his tone a blade. "Or this gets worse." The man's defiance crumbled, his voice shaking as he muttered, "Some guy, Ethan, paid me to scare her." Quinn's blood ran cold, her fingers tightening around her purse, Ethan's name a poison on the air. William's jaw clenched, his hand finding Quinn's, his touch a lifeline. "Get him to the station," he ordered the guards, who nodded, hauling the man away. Quinn stood tall, her gown a beacon. The night, her heart pounding with a mix of rage and relief. Ethan's plot had failed, his malice no match for William's foresight. "You knew," she said, her voice soft but fierce, her eyes meeting William's. He nodded, his expression grim but resolute. "I know his kind," he said, "and I know you're worth protecting." The SUV's door opened, and the driver gestured for them to get inside. Quinn slid into the seat, her hair falling across her shoulders, her spirit unbroken. The night had tested her, but she'd emerged stronger, her triumph on stage now mirrored by this swift reckoning. Ethan's shadow loomed, but Quinn was no longer his prey. She was a force, radiant and unstoppable, ready to face whatever came next. The Miami night pressed against the Starlight Pavilion's glass doors, its humid air laced with the salt of the nearby ocean. Quinn stepped into the parking lot, her emerald gown catching the sodium light's amber glow, her long black hair swaying like a dark tide with each measured step. The weight of her triumphant debut still thrummed in her veins, but Ethan's venomous encounter and the thwarted ambush in the lot had sharpened her senses. Her heels clicked on the asphalt, a steady rhythm against the quiet hum of departing cars, her purse clutched tightly in one hand. William walked beside her, his charcoal suit a quiet contrast to her radiance, his blue eyes scanning the shadows with the vigilance of a man who'd built an empire by foreseeing threats. The black SUV waited ahead, its sleek frame a promise, of safety, but the darkness between the parked cars felt alive, pulsing with unseen danger. Quinn's heart beat steadily, her resolve a flame that no malice could extinguish. William's foresight had saved her from the hired thug, whose confession had exposed Ethan's sinister plot. Yet, as they moved toward the SUV, the air grew heavier, charged with the residue of Ethan's hatred. William's hand rested lightly on her back, a gesture both protective and grounding, his presence a shield forged in love. The driver stood ready, his posture alert, but Quinn's eyes darted to the edges of the lot, where the shadows seemed to shift, as if conspiring against her. The parking lot was a maze of luxury vehicles, their polished surfaces glinting like mirrors under the lights. Quinn's gown shimmered with each step, her hair a silken cascade that caught the breeze, but her senses were razor-sharp, attuned to every sound, the distant hum of an engine, the soft scuff of footsteps, the faint rustle of leaves. Williams' guard trailed at a discreet distance, his radio crackling softly, a reminder of the net of protection woven around her. She trusted William's instincts, his ability to anticipate danger, but the weight of Ethan's vendetta pressed against her, a shadow she couldn't fully outrun. As they neared the SUV, a flicker of movement caught Quinn's eye, a figure darting between two cars cloaked in darkness. Her breath caught, her body tensing, but before she could speak, the guard surged forward, his boots pounding the asphalt. "Stay back!" he barked, his voice cutting through the night as he lunged toward the shadows. A muffled shout followed, then the sound of a struggle, a body hitting the ground, a grunt of pain. Quinn froze, her heart pounding, her eyes locked on the commotion. William's arm tightened around her, pulling her closer, his voice low and steady. "Stay with me," he said, his tone a lifeline in the chaos. The guard emerged from the darkness, dragging a masked figure, his hands cuffed behind his back. The man's hoodie slipped, revealing a gaunt face, his eyes wild with panic. A second guard appeared, his flashlight casting stark beams across the scene, illuminating the glint of a knife discarded on the ground. Quinn's stomach churned, the blade's presence a chilling confirmation of the threat. The attacker struggled, his curses sharp but incoherent, until the guard's grip tightened, silencing him. William stepped forward, his presence commanding, his blue eyes boring into the man's face. "Who sent you?" he demanded, his voice a low thunder, each word a verdict. The man's defiance crumbled under William's gaze, his shoulders slumping. "Ethan," he muttered, his voice trembling, "paid me to hurt her, said she needed to be taught a lesson." The words landed like a blow, Quinn's blood running cold, her fingers tightening around her purse. Ethan's hatred had spiraled into something monstrous, a plan to shatter her triumph with violence. She stood taller, her gown a beacon in the night, her resolve unyielding despite the chill of fear. William's jaw clenched, his hand finding hers, their fingers entwining like roots of an unshakable tree. "Get him to the police," William ordered, his tone clipped but absolute. The guards nodded, hauling the man toward a waiting security vehicle, its lights flashing in the distance. Quinn exhaled, her breath shaky, but her spirit intact. The knife on the ground glinted, a stark reminder of what could have been, but William's foresight had turned Ethan's trap to dust. "You knew," she said, her voice soft but fierce, her eyes meeting William's. He nodded, his expression grim but resolute. "I saw it in his eyes," he said. "Men like him don't let go without a fight." The SUV's driver opened the door, gesturing them inside. But Quinn paused, her gaze lingering on the spot where the attacker had been subdued. The night air was cool against her skin, the ocean's whisper a distant counterpoint to her racing pulse. She was no stranger to prejudice, to the world's attempts to dim her light, but this was different. Ethan's malice was personal, a blade aimed at her heart. Yet she stood unbroken, her performance's triumph still burning within her, her love for William a shield no hatred could pierce. As they slid into the SUV, the leather seats were cool against her gown, and Quinn's mind raced. Ethan's plot had been foiled, his hired thug exposed. But the weight of his vendetta lingered. She pictured his hazel eyes, once so familiar, now twisted with envy, and felt a surge of anger, not for herself, but for every soul who'd faced such hatred. William's hand rested on hers, his touch a quiet anchor, his blue eyes warm with pride. "You're unstoppable," he said, his voice a balm, grounding her in the truth of who she was. The driver started the engine, the SUV's hum a promise of escape, but Quinn's resolve burned brighter than ever. The parking lot's shadows retreated as they pulled away, the pavilion's glittering facade fading into the night. The guards had secured the attacker, his confession a key to Ethan's downfall, but Quinn knew this wasn't the end. Ethan's pride was a festering wound, and men like him rarely stopped at one failure. Yet, as the SUV glided through Miami's neon-lit streets, Quinn's heart remained steady, her spirit a flame that no darkness could touch. She leaned back, her hair spilling across the seat, her gown catching the faint glow of passing streetlights. The night had tested her, but she'd emerged stronger, her voice still echoing in the hearts of the pavilion's crowd. Ethan's trap had been foiled. His malice turned against him, but Quinn's triumph was more than survival. It was a declaration. She was no longer the girl he'd tried to break. She was Quinn, radiant, unyielding, a singer whose voice would reshape the world. The road stretched ahead, leading to their oceanfront villa, to their daughter Lila, to a life built on love and resilience. And in that moment, Quinn knew she was ready for whatever came next. The Miami morning broke with a fierce clarity, the sun spilling golden light across the city's glass towers, casting long shadows that seemed to retreat from the truth. Inside the sleek marble-lined courtroom of the Miami-Dade County Courthouse, Quinn stood tall, her emerald gown replaced by a tailored black blazer and skirt, her long black hair pulled into a sleek bun that framed her radiant face like a warrior's banner. Her deep brown eyes burned with a quiet fire, her posture unyielding as she faced the man who'd tried to shatter her triumph. Ethan sat at the defendant's table, his once pristine suit now slightly creased, his hazel eyes darting. Nervously, stripped of the arrogance that had fueled his backstage ambush. The air was thick with anticipation, the courtroom's wooden benches filled with reporters, onlookers, and a few of Quinn's supporters, their murmurs a low hum beneath the judge's gavel. The night's events, the Starlight Pavilion performance, Ethan's predatory advance, and the foiled parking lot attack had set the stage for this moment. William's legal team had moved with ruthless efficiency, gathering evidence that now lay stacked on the prosecutor's table. Text messages between Ethan and his hired thug, bank transfers detailing the payment, and the attacker's recorded confession, his voice trembling as he named Ethan as the mastermind. Quinn's heart beat steadily, not with fear, but with the weight of justice, a force she'd always believed in, honed by years of singing truths the world needed to hear. William sat behind her, his charcoal suit a symbol of quiet strength, his blue eyes fixed on her with unwavering pride. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and a gaze that could cut glass, called the court to order, her gavel a sharp crack that silenced the room. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed man in a navy suit, rose, his voice clear and commanding. "Your Honor, the defendant, Ethan Caldwell, orchestrated a deliberate attempt to harm Ms. Quinn Davis, driven by personal vendetta and malice." He outlined the case with precision, presenting the text messages, Ethan's words cold and calculated, instructing the thug to make her regret it. The courtroom stirred, a ripple of gasps from the gallery, reporters scribbling furiously. Quinn's jaw tightened, the memory of Ethan's hand grazing her arm backstage a spark that fueled her resolve. When called to the stand, Quinn moved, with grace, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor, her presence commanding the room as surely as it had the pavilion's stage. She swore the oath, her voice steady, a velvet force that carried the weight of her truth. The prosecutor's questions were direct, each one a thread weaving the narrative of Ethan's betrayal. "Ms. Davis, can you describe the events of last night at the Starlight Pavilion?" he asked, his tone measured but expectant. Quinn's Eyes met Ethan's for a fleeting moment, his gaze faltering under her unyielding stare. "He approached me backstage," she began, her voice clear, cutting through the courtroom's hush. "He tried to intimidate me, to claim a past we'd long buried. When I rejected him, he grabbed my arm, his words laced with possession." She recounted the corridor encounter, her tone unwavering, each detail a brushstroke painting of Ethan's malice. The gallery leaned forward, captivated, as she described the parking lot, the shadow of the attacker, the glint of the knife, and William's guard's swift intervention. "He wanted to break me," she said, her voice rising slightly, a note of defiance. "But he underestimated who I am." The prosecutor nodded, presenting the evidence, screenshots of Ethan's texts, the thug's confession video playing. On a courtroom screen, his voice a damning echo. "Ethan paid me to hurt her." The gallery erupted in murmurs, the judge's gavel silencing them. Ethan's lawyer, a wiry man with a nervous tic, attempted a defense, claiming Ethan's actions were a misunderstanding, a desperate plea for reconciliation gone awry. But the evidence was a tidal wave, washing away his flimsy excuses. Ethan's face paled, his hands clenching, his arrogance crumbling like ash under the weight of truth. Quinn's testimony was a beacon, her words a melody of resilience that held the courtroom in thrall. She spoke not just of the attack, but of the deeper wound, Ethan's attempt to dim her light, to reduce her to the girl he'd once dismissed. "He saw my success and wanted to own it," she said, her eyes sweeping the room, addressing not just the judge, but every soul present. "But my voice, my life, isn't his to claim." The gallery was silent, her words a mirror reflecting their complicity in a world quick to judge. A reporter in the back wiped her eyes, her pen still, while a young woman in the front row nodded, her face alight with admiration. William's presence behind her was a quiet anchor, his love a steady pulse that grounded her. He'd orchestrated the legal response with the same precision he'd brought to building the Starlight Pavilion, ensuring Ethan's plot was exposed before it could fester. As the prosecutor rested his case, Ethan's lawyer called no witnesses. His client's guilt lay bare. Ethan slumped in his chair, his hazel eyes hollow, his earlier bravado a distant memory. The judge's gaze was unyielding as she delivered her verdict. "Ethan Caldwell, for conspiracy and attempted assault, I sentence you to 3 years in prison, effective immediately." Her gavel struck, a final note in the symphony of justice. The courtroom exhaled, a collective release of tension as Ethan was led away, his hands cuffed, his head bowed. Quinn stood, her blazer crisp, her hair gleaming under the courtroom's lights, her spirit unbroken. She turned to William, his smile warm, his eyes crinkling with pride. "You were unstoppable," he said, his voice soft but resonant, a balm to the morning's intensity. Quinn's lips curved, her heart full, the weight of Ethan's malice lifting like fog in the sun. As they stepped outside, the courthouse's marble steps gleamed under the Miami sky, its blue expanse a promise of renewal. Reporters swarmed, their cameras flashing, but Quinn moved through them with grace, her hand in William's, their bond a shield against the chaos. The crowd parted, some offering nods of respect, others whispering her name like a prayer. She was no longer just the singer from the pavilion. She was a symbol, a voice that had turned pain into power. The air was warm, tinged with the ocean's salt, and Quinn's hair swayed as she walked, a dark tide marking her path. Ethan's downfall was complete, his prison sentence a testament to the truth she'd fought for. But for Quinn, this wasn't just about justice. It was about every soul who'd been targeted for daring to shine. She squeezed William's hand, her resolve a flame that burned brighter than ever, ready to carry her forward into a world waiting to hear her song. The Miami twilight draped the oceanfront villa in a soft purple glow, its floor-to-ceiling windows spilling golden light onto the manicured lawn. The gentle lapping of waves against the nearby shore wove a quiet rhythm, a counterpoint to the vibrant energy that still pulsed through Quinn's veins. Inside, the The villa was a sanctuary of warmth, its open-plan living space alive with the scent of jasmine drifting through the air. Quinn sat at her grand piano, its polished ebony surface catching the glow of a single lamp, her long black hair cascading over her shoulders like a silken tide. Her fingers hovered above the keys, poised to translate the fire of the past days to music. At 32, she was no longer the reclusive singer hiding behind a pseudonym. She was a force, her debut at the Starlight Pavilion a triumph that had shaken the world and silenced her detractors. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of the ocean and the soft creak of the floor as William leaned against the doorway, his charcoal suit replaced by a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. His blue eyes, warm with pride, watched Quinn with a reverence that needed no words. Their 6-year-old daughter Lila was curled in his arms, her small frame nestled against his chest, her brown eyes, mirror images of Quinn's, sparkling with curiosity. Lila's tiny hands clutched a stuffed dolphin, her bedtime delayed by the promise of hearing her mother play. The villa's walls, adorned with framed album covers and family photos, seemed to hum with the love that had carried Quinn through the crucible of Ethan's malice and the courtroom's judgment. Quinn's fingers touched the keys, coaxing a single note that hung in the air, pure and resonant like a star piercing the dusk. Her heart still carried the weight of the morning's verdict, Ethan's 3-year sentence, a hard-won justice that had laid his vendetta bare. But here, in the sanctuary of her home, that weight transformed into something else, a spark, a melody waiting to be born. She closed her eyes, letting the events of the past days, her triumphant performance, Ethan's predatory advance, the foiled attack, flow through her like a river. Each moment was a note, each emotion a chord, and she was ready to weave them into a song that would echo beyond the villa's walls. The first chords were soft, tentative, a jazz-infused lament that spoke of shadows and resilience. Quinn's fingers danced across the keys, her touch both delicate and fierce, the music a reflection of her spirit. The melody grew, its rhythm pulsing like a heartbeat, carrying the pain of being judged, the fire of standing tall, and the joy of love that refused to break. Lila stirred in William's arms, her eyes wide, her small voice whispering, "Mommy's song." William's smile deepened, his nod a silent encouragement, his presence a steady anchor as Quinn poured her soul into the keys. The music swelled, filling the villa with a sound that was both intimate and vast, as if the ocean outside had joined her song. Quinn's hair swayed as she leaned into the piano, her body moving with the rhythm. Her emerald gown from the pavilion replaced by a simple white blouse and jeans, yet her radiance undimmed. The melody was a story of a woman who'd faced a past that sought to dim her, of a voice that refused to be silenced, of a love that stood as her shield. Each note was a declaration, a promise to herself, to Lila, to every soul who'd ever been told they didn't belong. Lila slipped from William's arms, her bare feet pattering across the hardwood floor. She climbed onto the piano bench beside Quinn, her dolphin clutched tightly, her eyes fixed on her mother's hands. "Is this about the bad man?" she asked, her voice soft but piercing, her innocence cutting through the weight of the melody. Quinn's fingers paused, the silence as powerful as the music, her smile warm but tinged with the ache of truth. "It's about being strong, baby," she said, her voice a velvet caress. "About singing even when the world tries to stop you." Lila nodded, her small hand resting on the piano, her touch a spark that fueled Quinn's resolve. The melody shifted, its tone brightening, the chords weaving a thread of hope. Quinn's fingers moved faster, the music rising into an anthem of defiance, its rhythm a call to rise, to fight, to love fiercely. William stepped closer, his hand resting on the piano's edge, his eyes never leaving Quinn. He saw her not just as his wife, but as the woman who'd turned pain into power, whose voice had shaken the Starlight Pavilion and now filled their home with light. The song was new, born from the fire of her journey, its lyrics unwritten but alive in her heart. Words of courage, of justice, of a world where every voice could soar. The villa seemed to breathe with the music, its walls resonating with the force of Quinn's creation. Outside, the ocean's waves kept time, their rhythm a mirror to her own. Lila swayed beside her, humming softly, her voice a faint echo of Quinn's, a promise of the legacy she'd carry. Quinn's eyes met William's, a silent language passing. Between them, love, pride, an unspoken vow to face the world together. The melody soared, its final notes lingering like a held breath, a testament to the fire that burned within her. As the last chord faded, the villa fell silent, the air charged with the weight of what Quinn had created. Lila clapped, her small hands a burst of joy, her laughter filling the space like sunlight. "It's beautiful, Mommy," she said, her eyes bright with her mother's spirit. William's smile was a quiet triumph, his hand reaching for Quinn's, their fingers entwining, like roots of an unshakable tree. "You're unstoppable," he said, his voice soft but resonant, a mirror to the words he'd spoken in the courtroom. Quinn stood, her hair spilling across her shoulders, her heart full. The song wasn't just hers, it was a beacon for every soul judged for their skin, their past, their courage to rise. She looked at Lila, at William, at the piano that had carried her truth, and knew this was only the beginning. The world had heard her voice, but this new melody would carry her further, a promise to reshape the air, to challenge every shadow that dared to dim her light. The ocean whispered outside, its waves a song of renewal. Quinn's spirit burned, radiant and unyielding, her path stretching forward like the horizon. She was no longer just a singer. She was a force, a mother, a wife, a woman whose music would echo through time, calling others to rise with her. Quinn's journey of resilience and triumph has left us all inspired. Her voice is a beacon for those who dare to rise above judgment and adversity. What did her story stir in you? Have you ever faced a moment where your strength was tested, or witnessed someone shine against the odds? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable tale of courage and love. If Quinn's unyielding spirit moved you, hit that subscribe button, and share where you're watching from. Your support fuels more stories that uplift and ignite change. Stay tuned for our next journey, where we'll uncover more tales that resonate and inspire. See you in the comments and in our next video.